Right now in Mississippi, Erica is fleeing from her abusive boyfriend. She has 2 young children who are not his, and she's scared for her safety, but mostly she's scared for their safety. Her boyfriend has hurt her before, but this time he pointed a firearm at her sleeping children's heads, and she knows that she has to leave. So she finds a place to stay where her boyfriend can't find them, and she files for a protective order. She explains that he threatened her children with a firearm and asks the court to take his firearms away. The court grants the protective order, but the order does not include any restrictions on firearm possession. This is because Mississippi doesn't have a state law authorizing the inclusion of firearm restrictions on protective orders. Instead, protective order petitioners rely on the federal law that restricts domestic abusers under protection orders from purchasing or possessing firearms to keep them safe. However, the federal law doesn't cover dating partners, so it doesn't help Erica. Her abuser gets to keep his firearms and purchase more if he wishes. Now let's consider how the story unfolds if Erica lived in California. Erica was able to get a firearm restriction on her protective order because California includes dating partners in the firearm restriction. California law also mandates that when someone is newly restricted from having a gun, that they will be ordered to relinquish their guns. Therefore, law enforcement goes to her abuser's home and removes his guns, and Erica feels safer. In the United States in 2021, 2,678 individuals were killed by their intimate partners. The majority of these were women. Additionally, the majority of intimate partner homicides are committed with guns. But firearms are used non-fatally as well. A recent survey found that almost 10% of adult Americans experience non-fatal intimate partner firearm violence. Another study found that just over 3% of domestic violence events includes the use of a firearm. Now, 3% does not sound like a lot, but domestic violence is so ubiquitous that 3% of events amounts to 32,900 a year, or 90 a day. Abusers use firearms to intimidate, to threaten, to coerce, to point at, to shoot at, and sometimes kill their victims. And when a male abuser has access to a firearm, the risk of a homicide of the female partner increases by 5-fold. Additionally and tragically, one of the most common situations in which children die by homicide is in the context of domestic violence. And the vast majority of these homicides are committed with firearms. But we have laws in the US to respond to the danger of firearm-involved intimate partner violence. I already mentioned one of them, the firearm restrictions on domestic violence protective orders, which we have at the federal level and in some states. The second one is a federal law mandating that individuals who've been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence be prohibited from purchasing and possessing guns. States also have this law, some of them at any rate. The federal law is associated with a 9% decrease in intimate partner homicide and a 31% decrease in the homicides of domestic male children. Before the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act went into effect, dating partners who were convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence were not included in the firearm restriction. However, now the restriction extends to dating partners who are prohibited for 5 years from having a firearm. Other categories of intimate partners are put under a lifetime restriction. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, however, while an important and potentially life-saving act, did not extend the protective order firearm restriction to dating partners. Currently, only spouses or former spouses, people who have a child together, or people who cohabitate or used to cohabitate are eligible for the federal protective order firearm restriction. Given that just over half of individuals who commit intimate partner homicide, per FBI data, are dating their victims, this is a dangerous group. Some states have included firearm restrictions in their state protective order law and extend that to dating partners. When states include dating partners, there is an associated 13% reduction in intimate partner homicide. Extending firearm restrictions to dating partners potentially saves lives. However, in many states, including my home state of Michigan, there is no policy requiring or authorizing judges to order a person newly prohibited from having a gun to relinquish the guns they already possess, whether it's a misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence or a protective order that they are under. So mostly we think these people are keeping their guns. Research found that in states that have a relinquishment provision that say that newly prohibited people must relinquish their firearms, that when that law is in place on protective orders, there's a 12% reduction in intimate partner homicide. Research has also found that when states have this relinquishment provision for state-level misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence firearm restrictions, there's a significant reduction in homicides of pregnant and postpartum women. As an aside, it may surprise you to learn that homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women. This reduction in homicide when there's a relinquishment provision in the laws makes sense. Without an enforcement mechanism, individuals who have been deemed dangerous by the court and prohibited from having firearms are keeping them, and we haven't actually safeguarded anyone. We saw this in 2023 when a woman with a protective order against her abusive ex-partner was shot and killed along with her daughter because he maintained possession of his firearms despite being prohibited from having them. Neither the federal protective order firearm restriction nor the federal misdemeanor conviction for domestic violence firearm restriction include a relinquishment element, and many states don't have relinquishment elements either, meaning there's no clear enforcement mechanism for these restrictions. And when I talk about these laws, it's important to know that these laws have broad agreement among the American public. For example, a 2023 scientific opinion poll found that 81% of Americans support firearm restrictions for those who are currently under a domestic violence protective order. We need more research to better understand the impacts and the implementation of these intimate partner violence-related firearm laws. We need to know how many people are under these restrictions. Can you believe we actually don't know that very basic thing? We need to know whether they relinquish all of their firearms, whether they are prevented from purchasing new firearms. When we know these things about the implementation of the laws, we will be better able to put the outcomes we see into context. And importantly, improved implementation may better safeguard Americans. Because ultimately, our laws and the implementation of those laws can be improved and save more lives. More research will help us refine this even further and allow us to present evidence-based evidence on what works to legislators and other stakeholders. For example, what I didn't mention earlier is that these reductions I talked about are only seen in the homicides of white individuals, not Black individuals. And we don't know why that is, but we need to find out why that is so that we can safeguard the lives of the people, the community that is most at risk of firearm homicide. Because right now, too often in our country, the level of safety you have from an intimate partner violence perpetrator depends on the laws of the state in which you live and the implementation at the local level, and more broadly, the federal laws. Research suggests that we can make people safer by covering more individuals under domestic violence firearm restrictions and by implementing and enforcing those laws. Thank you.